Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. In the hush before dawn, when the frost still clung to the empty fields of Asgard, a dream crossed the Allfather's one good eye. It came not with thunder, but with the sound of a single ember breathing in the dark. He stood upon a plain of black glass where the sky had no stars, and far away a red glow climbed the horizon like a second sunrise no one had asked for. Between that glow and the onyx world lay the silhouette of a wolf, vast, patient, and listening. When the ember exhaled, the horizon answered. Flame rose, slow as a tide. The wolf did not move. It only blinked, and in the blink the day ended. Odin woke, hand to his chest, as if feeling for a string someone had tugged. In the rafters of the hall the ravens stirred, and the wind pressed a single word through the longhouse beams. A word that felt like a paw print left in snow. Fenrir. Across the worlds the name had not yet become a storm. It was only a rumor, a soft thread running from cave to cavern, hearth to mead bench, dream to dream. A wolf child had been born among the children of trickery, a son of Loki, sleek as obsidian and bright-eyed as winter moonlight. He played at shadows and chewed at roots. He chased his own breath and laid his ear to ice to hear the low song of the earth. The few who had seen him said he carried silence the way some creatures carried fur. The Norns heard the rumor too. At the roots of Yggdrasil, where the waters remember and the bark is old enough to feel, they leaned over the well that reflects all tomorrows. Ord, who knew the past as a mother knows a child's first cry. Verdandi, who breathed the present like a candle protects its flame. Skuld, who looked at the future and did not blink. They did not need words. The ripples told them what words would only bruise. A wolf and a flame would meet, and the knot of the worlds would tighten until it sang. They watched as the image ran forward. Iron glittered. Snow turned to light. An ocean remembered fire. On a distant shore a giant lifted a sword that had been sleeping in a volcano. In the heavens, a chain flashed like a line of stars. The Norns neither smiled nor wept. They laid the vision on the loom with the gentleness one gives to a bird's broken wing. Fate is patient, they thought. Fate is a road that walks us. In Jotunheim, Loki sat by a blue fire no wood had fed. He turned a twig between his fingers until it became a ring, and back again, mischief a river that could not stop finding shapes. Near him the wolf child dozed, paws twitching, nose tasting dreams. What do you chase? Loki asked, though he already knew. The pup's breath answered with a small sound, the sound of a wind entering a cave and discovering a second sky inside. Flame, said Loki softly. You chase the warmth you haven't met yet. He too had dreams, but he never told them. He kept them like knives he might someday need to throw away. Word reached Asgard, and from Asgard it reached fear. The Aesir speak of courage as if it were a sword, but they know fear as well as any fisherman knows the weight of an empty net. Odin called counsel. The Norn's whisper pricked the back of his mind like snow beginning to fall. He remembered the black plain, the red horizon, the still wolf. He remembered how endings sometimes put on the mask of beginnings to get close enough to be heard. "We will bring the wolf here," Odin said at last. "A child is softer in a cradle than in a storm." Some nodded, some argued, but destiny is a tide, and tides are persuasive. Messengers went, bridges glowed, and the wolf child came to Asgard with a yawn that showed milk teeth and a gaze that showed nothing at all. Tyr was the first to greet him. Warriors greet with hands. Tyr greeted with steadiness, which is worth more. He knelt so the pup could decide what size the god would be. "Hello, little one," he said, and though the halls bristled with spears and laughter and watchful eyes, Fenrir went to Tyr as if to a memory. He touched his nose to Tyr's palm and closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in a kind of listening. Tyr felt the listening move through his own bones. He did not say he was brave. He only kept his hand there long enough for trust to recognize itself. Life in Asgard grew around the wolf like moss around a stone. He learned the cadence of boots and the shape of the wind that lived between the great halls. The gods watched, measuring growth with glances. Every day he returned bigger, as if someone kept pouring night into him. He would run the courtyards at dusk, a streak of ink across gold light, and the sky would look lower when he passed. At meals he sat beside Tyr and took meat from his hand with care so exact it felt like prayer. At first the Aesir laughed when he tried to howl. It came out as a shy flute, but in time his voice found its ribs. One night, when the moon hung like a bronze coin and silence held its breath to hear, Fenrir lifted his head and sang. It wasn't a threat. It was a map. The song traveled the timbers, climbed the shield racks, slipped through the thatch, and went running over fields and fjord. It reached a mountain that remembered it had once been fire, and the mountain hummed back low in its throat. The next morning, Odin stood alone beneath the spears and listened to what only ravens and kings learn to hear. The house had changed size, not by walls or roof beams, but by destiny. The child had grown faster than the patience of the gods. Fear put on its armor in the corners of their eyes. Skalds will tell you that prophecies arrive like thunder. More often they come as small errors. Doors that stick, birds that fly the wrong way, fires that hiss when there is no rain. In the forge, sparks began to leap farther than the hammer asked. In the stables, the horses refused a certain path. In the kitchen, a pot boiled without flame. None of it was a story until together it was. What the Norns had seen began to breathe in the world like a sleeping thing turning in its dreams. Somewhere in Muspelheim, fire licked its lips. Somewhere under ice, a river learned the word flood. The gods, who managed storms the way shepherds manage sheep, found themselves suddenly counting and not knowing what number would come next. "Make a game," Odin said. "The way kings say, build a wall, when they mean hide your fear. A test of strength. Chains forged with gifts and songs and prudence." He chose that last word like a man pulling a thorn and calling it a needle. Dwarves were summoned, and the dwarves, who measure the world in atoms and promises, began to listen to impossible requests. "A chain that is not a chain," they said, almost smiling. We will make you a ribbon that can hold a storm. Fenrir learned new words: challenge, prove, pretend. The Aesir brought him iron, links thick as a man's wrist, and laughed like men who had not dreamed of lava. Let us see your strength, they said. Break it and feast with us. Tyr did not laugh, but he did not stop them. The wolf allowed the chain as children allow crowns made of flowers. He grew serious, then playful, then still. When the chain asked him who he was, he answered, "Iron shattered like bread crust." The gods cheered with the relief of those who have found reason to postpone truth. That night, Tyr sat with Fenrir watching the sky learn its stars. The wolf's breath fogged in the cool like small clouds practicing being bigger. "They will try again," Fenrir said, not accusing, not afraid. His voice had deepened. It sounded like snow beginning. "Yes," said Tyr. He did not add, "We will try to hold what cannot be held without first holding ourselves." In dreams, Odin saw the ribbon that was not yet a ribbon, made of the footfall of a cat, the roots of a mountain, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird, and the sound of a shadow, the sort of ingredients that make poems but also prisons. The dwarves called it Gleipnir, which in their tongue meant that which gleams like a promise. He woke with the certainty a man feels in the last note of a dirge. They would bring it to the green island where oaths go to look at themselves in water. But this is a story, and stories are not iron, they bend to carry meaning. The chain was only a thread in a larger weaving, and the weaving had begun long before the wolf was brave enough to be born. Somewhere, a giant warmed his hands at a fire that could not die. Somewhere, a sword waited not to be unsheathed but to be remembered. The flame in Odin's first dream had not moved closer. It had learned to be patient. That was when the old woman came. She was not invited because prophecy never is.
She arrived like wind inside a house, the sort of visitor whose name you only learn after she has given you something you cannot pay for. Her cloak carried the smell of pine and lightning-struck rock. Her hands remembered dirt. She found Tyr and the wolf by the practice field, where the grass had begun to grow in bends shaped like running. "I have a story," she said. Fenrir watched her with the attention of a forest. "Is it for me?" he asked. "It is for what listens inside you," she said. She told of a flame that was not merely fire but the memory of fire. She told of dawns that had been born and died before this world learned to name them, of swords that drank day and returned it as night. "A flame is not angry," she said. "It is hungry, and hunger is not wicked. Hunger is a map back to the first need." "Why tell us?" Tyr asked. The old woman smiled with a face like bark. "Because someone must remember that prophecy is not a cell but a door. Wolves know doors. Flames do too." She turned to Fenrir. "One day, they will bring you a ribbon that feels like silk and sounds like a lie. If you agree to wear it, demand a promise you can believe in." "What promise is that?" the wolf asked. "That those who claim to guard the world will dare to put their own hand in the mouth of fate." The wind shifted. The woman was gone in the way water leaves a rock, by stopping being here and starting to be everywhere else. Tyr and Fenrir stood together, listening to the space where she had been. "Will you trust me?" Tyr said at last, and the question hung like a lantern. Fenrir did not answer.
He lowered his head until his brow touched Tyr's knuckles, and in that touch was a vow older than language. Then he lifted his gaze to the line of hills that guard Asgard's horizons. Somewhere beyond them, a black plain waited for a red sunrise and a still wolf. Somewhere within them, A flame was learning the discipline of holding back. The day of the green island would come. But for now the sky slipped into blue, and the training grounds filled with the sound of shields, and in the kitchens a pot boiled for honest reasons, and in the forge the sparks learned their manners again. Peace is not the absence of omens. It is the courage to keep walking while they gather like birds on a wire. Sleep now, listener. Let your breath find the slow pace of the wolf's stride. In the distance, an ember breathes. In the near field, a paw print waits for snow. The whisper has begun. The chains have not. Between those two, between the wolf and the flame, this story will make its way to morning. The dwarves of Nidavellir worked in silence that was not quiet. Every strike of the hammer sounded like an oath. Every ember glowed with memory. In the deepest forge, under roots older than fire itself, they built what the gods had asked for, a chain that was not a chain, soft as silk, strong as sorrow, a thing that gleamed like the truth when it wanted to lie. They named it Gleipnir, and when it was finished it sang, not a song for ears, but for hearts that knew inevitability. It sang of stillness and surrender, of storms that believed they were stars. Even the metal that had no weight trembled under its own promise. Odin listened to that song and mistook it for victory. The All-Father had long since learned that destiny sounds beautiful before it breaks you. Still, he called the gods together. They would take the chain to the Green Island, a place between breath and silence, a meadow so still that even echoes dared not return. There, Fenrir would face the gift meant for him. The wolf felt them coming long before he saw them. He lay by the water's edge, watching his reflection ripple with the wind. Every time he blinked, the reflection changed. Now a cub, now a shadow, now a flame. He did not know which was truer. Tyr arrived first, as he always did. He carried no weapon, only his gaze. Behind him the gods followed: Odin, Thor, Freyr, and Heimdall, each armored more in fear than steel. Their laughter came forced, like wind through hollow trees. "Another game," said Fenrir, rising to meet them. His voice rolled through the meadow like thunder remembering itself. Odin smiled the way kings do when they are praying to something they don't believe in. "Yes," he said, "another game, a ribbon woven by the dwarves, too light to break, too beautiful to fear. Will you test it for us, Wolf of Night?" Fenrir looked at Tyr. There was no command, no promise, only silence between them. And in that silence was the memory of the old woman's words. "If you agree to wear it, demand a promise you can believe in." "I will," said the wolf at last. "But one of you must place his hand in my mouth. If I cannot break free, I must know I am not betrayed." A murmur passed among the gods like wind stirring ash. Odin looked away. Thor's grip tightened on his hammer. None moved except Tyr. Without a word he stepped forward. He met Fenrir's gaze, and in that meeting courage was not loud. It was steady and trembling and real. He placed his hand within the wolf's jaws. "Then let it be done," said Fenrir softly. They bound him in Gleipnir. The ribbons slipped around his fur like moonlight, weightless, soundless, shimmering with deceit. Coiled once, twice, thrice. The air grew heavy with the scent of magic and unspoken guilt. Try, said Odin, and Fenrir tried. First nothing happened. Then the world tilted. Grass bent the wrong way. The sea inhaled. Mountains leaned toward the sound that followed. The sound of power, remembering it was alive. But Gleipnir did not break. It sang. A thin, high sound, like the sky sighing through the eye of a needle. Fenrir strained, muscles rippling like night caught in stormlight. He tore at the ground, claws carving runes of rage and despair. Still the chain held. Still the gods watched, not in triumph but in the shame of those who mistake fear for wisdom. And when Fenrir realized the truth, that the chain would never break, that the promise of the gods was dust, he turned his eyes to Tyr. The god did not move. He did not plead. He simply closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry." The jaws of the wolf closed, and silence became a scream the world would remember. The meadow turned to frost. The gods stepped back, their victory hollow and their hearts unsteady. Tyr knelt beside the wolf, cradling the space where his right hand had been. But his face did not show pain, only the deep, terrible calm of someone who has just paid the exact price fate demanded. Odin turned away. He saw, in the wolf's eyes, the reflection of his first dream. The black plain, the red horizon, the flame waiting. And for the first time, he wondered if chains could ever silence prophecy, if flame could ever forget hunger. They left Fenrir bound upon the island, Gleipnir cutting into fur and faith alike. The wind circled him gently, as if even the air knew not to pity too loudly. He did not howl. He did not curse. He simply breathed, slow, steady, waiting, each breath carrying the sound of fire, remembering how to grow. Far away in Muspelheim, the flames stirred, and somewhere beneath the waves, a serpent moved in its sleep. The world had begun to turn toward its twilight. Gleipnir did not cut the flesh the way iron does. It slid beneath it like cold through a house with thin walls, a trespasser that learns every room by heart. It held the wolf not only by limb but by meaning. Fenrir lay upon the green island, and the ribbon, soft, bright, merciless, nested in his fur like moonlight pretending to be snow. He learned the mathematics of stillness, how to move without moving, how to breathe without feeding the fire of rage, how to let a storm pass through one's body and leave the house standing. At first, the gods kept watch with the pride of jailers certain of their arithmetic. But days became weeks, and weeks gathered into a braided rope of seasons. The guards changed, the speeches shortened, and the silence stayed. Even vigilance learns to yawn. Only Tyr came without armor. He sat cross-legged in the meadow, left arm bandaged, right sleeve folded and pinned. He spoke seldom. He offered water. He listened. Trust did not mend the ribbon, but it mended the air around it. "Does it hurt?" he asked once. "It teaches," said the wolf. The world adjusted around the new stillness as a river adjusts to a stone. Birds nested in the island's reeds as if prophecy were a windbreak. Meadow mice made small paths like cursive script, writing their timid literature between blade and shadow. Clouds practiced shapes for the end of days. Far away in Asgard, laughter resumed its public duties. Feasts returned. Boasts grew antlers again. Thor claimed a storm as if it were a horse. Freyr measured harvest like music. Skalds were careful with the word Fenrir the way sailors are careful with the word ice. Even a name can summon weather. In the nights between duties, Odin climbed to the highest balcony and offered both ravens small pieces of tomorrow. He asked them to bring him endings he could bargain with. They returned with whispers that tasted of smoke. The All-Father swallowed them like bitter tea and called it wisdom. On the island, a new ritual was born of not moving. Fenrir counted dawns by the chill on his tongue, dusks by the weight of birdsong. He learned to trespass inward. He found the little room inside every creature where it keeps its first fire, the ember whose only task is to remember. He kept his there, quiet as a secret under snow. The ribbon learned its glow and could not douse it. When the wind crossed the meadow from the sea, it carried salt that spoke of old beginnings. Fenrir listened and understood that patience is not the opposite of hunger. Patience is hunger that has learned the alphabet. Sometimes he dreamed of running. In those dreams the earth kept pace with him, not the other way around. He tore open distances as if they were curtains hiding a warmer room. The dream always ended at a horizon stained red, and at the edge of that stain a flame waited, not beckoning, not threatening, waiting. He would wake with the taste of iron and sunrise in his mouth. Gleipnir would lie against his ribs, gently as a lie. Tyr learned to sleep near the island. One night he woke to the wolf's breathing change, like tide turning inside a cave. "Tell me," Tyr said. "The flame," said Fenrir. "It does not move forward. It grows inward. And you?" "I do what fire does inside stone," said the wolf. "I make room." Winter stretched the world thin enough that its stitches showed. The sky whitened to the color of old vows. Snow came to the island softly, inspected its prisoner, and decided not to stay. "Not yet," said the snow to itself, and went to visit mountains. At the roots of Yggdrasil the Norns listened to water that had memorized every voice it had ever met. Urd murmured names of things that had been whole. Verdandi measured the present in threads so fine a breath could sever them. Skuld counted backwards from a number no one had taught her. Between them, the loom tallied a pattern like frost on glass, delicate, intricate, unstoppable. "Do they change it?" Verdandi asked, not quite hopeful. "They give it edges," said Urd. "They give it teeth," said Skuld. Loki came at dusk, dressed as someone who knew better. He stood by the reeds and looked at his son as if at a window through which he had once escaped and now could not enter. "Do you hate me?" he asked, because he could not ask what he meant. "Do you understand me?" Fenrir turned his head slowly, like a door deciding whether to creak. "I do not hate doors," he said. Loki laughed the way a cut laughs when it meets salt. He knelt, thin hands worrying a stalk of grass to green threads. "They will call this necessary," he said. "They will call it peace. They will call it what they can carry," said Fenrir. "What do you call it?" "A rehearsal," Loki answered, and meant it. He left a knife by the water the way some leave coins for ferrymen. It was not for chains. It was for stories. Tyr collected it at dawn and did not speak of it. Time, which pretends to be an arrow, practiced being a circle. Children in Asgard learned to pronounce Fenrir and were told to eat their stew. Smiths forged new links for old fears. The dwarves sent word that Gleipnir was not to be blamed for obedience. It was a guest at a banquet whose food was inevitability. In Jotunheim, a mountain split along an old scar and discovered. It was hollow enough to echo. In Muspelheim, Sparks rehearsed a language with more verbs than nouns. Beneath the sea, the great serpent shifted an inch, a small act for a large thing, but the ocean noticed and wrote it down. The world is a ledger. It balances itself with storms. On the first day of the second spring after the binding, a child wandered to the island's shore. She was small enough that the reeds spoke over her head like conspirators. Her hair knew more knots than the sailcloth of a warship. She had brought, like a priest, an offering. A heel of bread wrinkled with pockets of air. Tyr rose to stop her, then sat back down. The world teaches some lessons better than guardians. The child stood before the wolf and considered him thoroughly, as one might consider a painting of a night sky that has learned to breathe. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "Yes," said Fenrir, "because truth can be a kindness when carefully measured." She tore the bread and threw a piece. It landed near the wolf's paw. He did not move. He looked to Tyr. The god nodded once. Fenrir bent and took the bread with a care that made the meadow listen. The child smiled. "You are a good dog," she said, full of her own mercy. "I am an old name," said the wolf gently. She frowned in the effort of understanding, then offered the last piece to Tyr. "For your hand," she said solemnly. Tyr accepted and divided the bread the way judges divide silence. "Remember this," he told her. "Mercy has teeth too. Use them when you must." That night the aurora unrolled above the island like letters addressed to patience. Fenrir watched the green script and read what only prisoners can read. Promise disguised as distance. He breathed with it until his ribs forgot the shape of rage. Odin came once more, alone. His cloak carried the smell of road and riddle. He stood just beyond the range of the wolf's breath and watched the chain glow. "We hold the world together with small cruelties," he said to no one. "Is that wisdom?" Fenrir did not answer. Kings do not always deserve the answers they seek. Odin's single eye turned toward the horizon that tasted of iron. "Do you dream?" he asked. "Yes," said the wolf. "Of doors. And beyond them? Rooms where fire has learned not to apologize." Odin's heart bent under the sentence as a spear bends under a too heavy shield. He left without farewell. The ravens followed, each carrying half a truth. A summer of omens arrived carrying baskets of ripe thunder. Bees worked the meadows with monastic focus. The sea drew long blue breaths. Then, without warning, a ship glided past the island with no wind in its sails. Its hull was pale as bone, its oars still as secrets. No crew called, yet it moved as if summoned by a rule older than water. Tyr stood. The ship made no sound upon the tide. Fenrir tasted it on his tongue and knew its wood was not wood. It was promise, planed and fitted and caulked with prophecy. Naglfar, he said, though no one had taught him the name. It is early, Tyr whispered. Everything arrives on time when the time is made of it, said the wolf. The ship vanished into mist that had not been there before it came. The ribbon grew warm at dusk, as if remembering the hands that forged it. Fenrir counted the warmths and found a pattern in them. Every 30th sunset, a faint chord, like a harp string plucked in an empty hall. He learned to breathe with that music, not against it. Patience is not surrender. It is choreography. Tyr began to bring stories as one brings cool water. He told of a farmer who taught stones to brace his walls, of a widow who learned to sleep on the side of the bed where the missing did not ache, of a child who believed that the moon was the world's round eyelid. Fenrir listened and understood why gods envy mortals. They are allowed to become what they do, not only what they are. On a day the wind could not decide how to wear its clouds, the old woman returned. She appeared where reeds made a doorway for small things with urgent errands. Her cloak smelled again of pine and lightning-struck rock. You have kept your promise, she told Tyr. You have kept your teeth, she told the wolf. What comes now? Tyr asked. The arithmetic of endings, she said. The flame that waits is no longer alone. She knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. The meadow answered with a tremor small enough to be mistaken for thought. Listen, she said. They listened. Beyond the island, far beyond the sea and the mountains that practiced being laws, a hum rose, low, patient, tireless. It was the sound iron makes in the dark when it begins to remember fire. It was the sound of swords rehearsing their names. It was the world bending toward a door. When? Tyr said. When the breath you hold meets the breath the world is holding, she replied. Do not hurry grief. Do not punish hope. She stood older than when she came, which means nearer to truth. Remember, she said to Fenrir, waiting is a kind of running the world cannot see. To Tyr, and courage is the art of not confusing quiet with peace. The reeds closed. She was gone. That evening, the sky rehearsed the colors of endings. Copper, wine, coal. Fenrir lay with his head on the ground and felt the earth's old pulse. It matched his own in a slow duet. He understood then that the flame in the dream had learned the wolf's patience, and the wolf had learned the flame's resolve. They were no longer waiting for each other. They were waiting together. Will you forgive me? Tyr asked, the question small and immense. I will remember you, said the wolf. In the end, that is what forgiveness knows how to be. A wind rose from the north, tasting of iron and apples. Somewhere in the distance a horn practiced the first note of a future call. Gleipnir cooled against the wolf's ribs like a shy moon. Sleep now, listener. Let your breath follow the circle time has drawn tonight. The flame is not nearer, and yet everything is warmer. The door is not open, and yet the room has shifted. Between the wolf and the waiting, morning practices its steps. The world had learned to speak in murmurs since the day of the binding. Storms softened their voices, mountains whispered their patience. But above them all, the sky carried a weight it could no longer bear. Clouds began to wander without direction, their bellies heavy with omens. In Asgard the air felt older. The laughter in the halls no longer rang the same way. It broke in the middle like a harp with one missing string. Even the mead had turned colder in the cups of gods. Odin watched the changes like a man reading an old promise in fading ink. Each gust of wind, each flicker of flame, felt like a message from a future that had already started walking toward him. The ravens brought strange tidings. They spoke of wolves in the east that moved like shadows without form, of seas that dreamed in their sleep, and of a chain that hummed even without wind. Fenrir's name had become a quiet law in Asgard, never spoken aloud, but always present in the corners of thought. On the green island, the wolf's eyes no longer reflected the sky. They reflected memory, a deeper thing older than light. Gleipnir gleamed faintly around him, soft as silk, cruel as truth. The ribbon's song was steady now, a single unbroken note, a hum too patient to be defied. Tyr sat by him as he always did, carving runes in wood with his left hand. They were words for peace, though peace had forgotten its shape. "Do you still dream?" Tyr asked. "I do," said the wolf, "but the dreams have stopped being mine." He lifted his head. The air around the island trembled like a drumhead. "The world dreams through me now." Tyr looked out at the horizon, and though his eyes were godly, he could not tell where the ocean ended and the sky began. It all shimmered with a heat that had no sun. Far below, at the roots of Yggdrasil, the Norns found that their well had grown restless. The water no longer reflected the threads as clearly as before. Ripples formed even when no one breathed. Something in the fabric of fate was tugging from the other side. Skuld traced her finger through the reflection. "This one pulls backward," she said. Verdandi frowned. "It should not." Ord's voice was quiet as moss. "The wolf waits." "The wolf cannot move," Verdandi answered. Ord's gaze did not shift. "Then the world moves for him." They watched as the image shimmered, a chain glowing faintly, a flame pulsing somewhere beneath the sea, a shadow climbing the horizon of prophecy. In Jotunheim giants stirred. In Muspelheim, the fire children of Surtur sharpened their laughter. The sound of their breath rose through the 9 realms, like the slow boiling of forgotten rage. Every ember had begun to dream of freedom. The gods, ever watchful and afraid of their own foresight, sent Thor to the dwarves for counsel. The smiths listened, their eyes black with soot and secrets. "We made what you asked," said one, "but you cannot bind what was born from the same thread as the world." Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir. "Then what holds him?" The dwarf smiled, teeth glowing like sparks. your belief that he is still bound. In the long nights, Odin walked alone to the edge of Bifrost. He stared down through the bridge's light into the dark sea between stars. There, in the shimmer of the rainbow's shadow, he saw what the ravens refused to say aloud. The flame was rising, not fast, not furious, patiently as if remembering an old route home. And within it shapes moved, a serpent's coil, a wolf's outline, a figure carrying a sword that glowed with the color of endings. Ragnarok was not coming. It was already here, whispering beneath the rhythm of time. The first sign came as silence. Not absence of sound, but its opposite. A silence so complete that even thought stumbled. The second was the light. It began as a shimmer in the sky above Asgard. A trembling thread, silver and gold, stretched too tight. Then, without warning, it broke. The heavens split like cloth torn by invisible hands. Across the world, creatures looked up as stars blinked like eyes waking from fever. The sun flared, then dimmed, then burned twice as bright. A flame that had learned hunger. In the meadow Gleipnir stirred. The ribbon vibrated against the wolf's chest like a heartbeat not his own. Fenrir opened his eyes. He saw the sky cracking in its reflection, and for the first time since his binding, he smiled. "It begins," he whispered. Tyr rose, sensing what the earth already knew. The air around them thickened with light, not warmth but memory. He could hear, faintly, the clang of swords and the groan of mountains. "Are you ready?" he asked. Fenrir tilted his head, listening to the sky as one might listen to the sea. "The flame has waited long enough," he said. "Now it remembers its name." The ground trembled. The sea lifted its shoulders. The birds fell silent mid-flight, their wings frozen in the breath between worlds. Gleipnir began to hum louder, its song climbing to a pitch that only gods and fire could hear. Odin stood in the golden hall, his ravens restless on their perches. Lightning bloomed outside without clouds to feed it. He turned toward the horizon and saw what he had dreamed 1,000 times. The red dawn that was not dawn. He whispered a prayer he no longer believed in. "May the wolf forgive what the gods have forgotten." The walls shuddered. The spears in Valhalla quivered in their racks. Somewhere far below, the chain that was not a chain began to smoke. Fenrir closed his eyes. "Now," he said. The ribbon sang once, sharp, final, perfect. Then it broke. There are no words for the sound that followed. It was not thunder, not flame, not grief. It was the sky remembering it had lungs. The meadow erupted with light, white, gold, red, as the wolf rose, stretching for the first time in ages. The ground caved beneath his steps. The air tore in ribbons. The gods felt it in their bones, the way trees feel wind before storms. Tyr fell to one knee, his balance caught between awe and sorrow. The wolf turned to him, and for a moment the world seemed kind. "You kept your promise," said Fenrir. Tyr bowed his head. "And you kept the fire." The wolf looked toward the burning horizon, and every shadow in creation leaned to follow his gaze. In that instant, Asgard knew its silence was over. The sky broke, the flame rose, the wolf ran, and somewhere, in the space between prophecy and dawn, the world took its first breath of the end. Sleep now, listener. The flame has remembered its hunger. The wolf has remembered the way home. And the sky has finally learned how to break. When Gleipnir broke, it did not shatter, it unwove. Each thread drifted upward like smoke, turning to stars, then fading into nothing. The air smelled of iron and sorrow. Fenrir rose, slow as time waking from a long sleep. Every step cracked the earth's patience. His fur burned with the memory of flame. His breath came out in clouds that glowed red against the dim sky. He had no roar, only a silence that shook mountains. Tyr stood before him, the only god who did not lift a weapon. "Will you end us?" he asked. The wolf looked at him and saw not a god, but a friend standing in the last calm before fire. "I will end what must end," said Fenrir. "Nothing more." And the world began to burn. The sun screamed as it fell into shadow. The moon split itself trying to flee. From the seas, Jormungandr, the great serpent, rose like memory given form. Its eyes were storms, its coils, continents. The flames of Muspelheim poured through the cracks of the sky, and from them came Surtur, his sword brighter than creation's first light. Each step he took turned wind to cinder, each breath painted the world in red. Asgard's walls trembled, the halls of Valhalla quivered with fear. Warriors who had waited centuries for glory found themselves whispering prayers that had forgotten their gods' names. Odin rode forth, spear in hand, his cloak torn by prophecy, his eye full of dawn. He met Fenrir in the field of shadows, the same plain he had dreamed so long ago. No sound followed. Even the wind knelt in awe. Odin's spear glittered with ancient runes, each one a word of power, a promise made to eternity. But the wolf was larger than promises. He was the truth that came after them. They circled once, twice, as if testing whether time still mattered. Then Fenrir leapt, and the sky folded around them like cloth around flame. The battle was not seen, only felt. The earth shook, the rivers boiled, the trees cried sap like blood. When the light returned, Odin's spear lay broken, and Fenrir, jaws red with history, stood beneath a sky that no longer recognized itself. The All-Father was gone. Only the echo of his breath remained, woven into the wind that would carry his name. Across the worlds the prophecy unfolded, like a storm reading its own scripture. Thor struck Jormungandr, and lightning tore open the sea. The serpent's venom met the god's blood, and both fell together, each the mirror of the other's rage. Freyr met Surtur, steel against flame, and where they fought, forests became glass. The bridge of Bifrost shattered, its colors scattering across the void like dying memories. The souls of warriors marched into smoke, their songs turning to ashes mid-verse. And above it all, Fenrir howled not in victory, but in mourning. The sound rolled through the ruins of heaven, echoed in the broken shields of men. and reached even the Norn's well, where the water boiled with grief. At the root of Yggdrasil the great tree groaned, its bark blistered from the heat of 1,000 endings. The Norns watched as their threads blackened one by one, and Skuld whispered, "So this is how it sounds when a story forgets to breathe." Verdandi tried to hold one last thread between her fingers, the thread that belonged to light, but it slipped and the flame took it. Ord closed her eyes and said, "So be it," and the tree began to burn. Tyr found Fenrir again in the midst of ruin. The god was wounded, his blood marking the soil in runes only the dying could read. The wolf stood motionless, his eyes like eclipses, full, yet dark. "It's over," Tyr said, though the world was still screaming. Fenrir shook his head. "No," he said, "it's beginning again. The flame only knows how to start." He lowered himself until his face met the gods. "You once gave your hand to truth," he said. "Now give your silence to memory." Tyr smiled through the pain. "I will see you again," he said. "In every dawn," replied the wolf. The world cracked open like a shell too small for what it had birthed. Flame devoured sky, sea swallowed earth, and the stars, one by one, fell into the ocean like tired eyes closing. Then came stillness, not death, stillness. The flame that had consumed the world folded inward. Its light turned gentle, its color soft as breath. From its core, a single spark drifted into darkness, and where it landed, the first seed of the new world began to glow. Fenrir stood upon the last mountain. All around him was ash. The air shimmered with the ghosts of color. He looked at what remained, the silence, the ember, the waiting. "I was not your end," he whispered to the horizon. "I was your bridge." He closed his eyes. The flame answered, and together they vanished into the dawn that had yet to be named. The sky was empty, no stars, no thunder, no war, only the long breath of silence, rising and falling over a world remade of ash. Where Asgard had burned, the air shimmered. The ruins were not ruins. They were memories, folded gently into the soil by unseen hands. And from the darkened earth, the first green shoot broke through, its leaf trembling like a heartbeat discovering itself again. The flame had not died. It had learned how to rest. At the edge of the still sea, something moved. Not a ripple, not a storm, a pulse. And from beneath the ash, Fenrir stirred. No chains bound him now. No gods watched from afar. His fur no longer carried night. It carried dawn, gold and silver interwoven with shadow. He rose, not as destruction, but as remembrance. A guardian born of the lesson flame had taught, that endings are merely the earth inhaling. He looked to the horizon where the sun should have been, and it came, slow, hesitant, like a wounded thing learning to rise again. Its light touched his face, and the wolf closed his eyes. In the far places of the world, life began its quiet return. From the ocean's cooled glass, mist rose, and with it, new rivers whispered names no tongue had yet spoken. Mountains dreamed of growing again. The wind remembered its songs. Even the ashes began to hum softly, a music too gentle for gods, made only for beginnings. Two humans, the last of their kind, awoke in a grove that had survived the fire. Their names were Lif and Lifthraser, and they looked upon the world not with fear, but with the wonder of children who know nothing of the word again. They found berries growing through stone, and water running beneath the roots of Yggdrasil's wounded trunk. When they drank, the taste was of rain and memory. "The gods are gone," said Lifthraser. "Then it is our turn to remember them," said Lif. And the world began its second breath. Far beyond their sight, in a place between sky and time, the Norns sat once more. Their loom was gone, their well cooled to glass, but their fingers still remembered how to weave. "This time," said Verdandi, "the threads will know what they are." Ord smiled, tracing one shimmering strand. It glowed faintly, not gold, not silver, but dawn-colored. "Even prophecy can rest," she said. Skuld looked out across the horizon. "What of the wolf?" Ord answered softly. "He walks where the light sleeps, not to destroy, but to remind the world to wake." And so Fenrir walked, through valleys where grass whispered of fire, through rivers that carried starlight instead of fish, through mountains that bowed as he passed. He did not seek worship or forgiveness. He sought stillness, the quiet understanding between fire and soil, between ending and return. Sometimes when he rested, the wind would bring a voice, low, steady, familiar, tear, not as a ghost but as memory made kind. "You kept your promise," the voice would say, and the wolf would answer, "So did you." When night finally returned, it did not bring fear. The stars came one by one, shy and new, their light soft as sighs, and among them one burned brighter, not white, not gold, but crimson at its edge, the mark of the flame that had once been prophecy. Fenrir lay beneath it, his breath slow and even, and the stars shimmered like threads in a new tapestry. Somewhere in the distance, a young child born to the new dawn looked up and asked, "Who made the sky burn so beautifully?" And her mother whispered, "A wolf and a flame once dreamed it so." The world slept, not in darkness, in peace. Dreams drifted across the oceans like quiet ships. The gods were gone, yet not gone. They lived in the rhythm of the waves, in the roots of trees, in the warmth between one breath and the next. And in that stillness, a voice, the same that began the tale, spoke once more. "Sleep now, listener, for even in the end, the story remembers you." The wolf rests, the flame hums softly, and morning waits at the edge of your dream. This was the wolf and the flame, the tale of Fenrir's prophecy. And the dawn will always return.